My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing Forrest Gump, the beloved 1994 Tom Hanks movie.
Hello, my name's Forrest Gump. Would you like a chocolate?
Oh, thank you.
It's funny what a young man recollects.
You're the same as everybody else. You are no different.
Your boy's different.
Are you stupid or something? Mama says stupid is as stupid does. I'm Jenny. I'm Forrest Gump.
She was my most special friend. My only friend.
I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from California is Jim Robinson, who always gets his wisdom out of a Whitman sampler. Jim, do you really believe that life is just a box of chocolates?
No, I've never really understood that because every candy in the box is going to be sweet and sugary, and life ain't like that, at least not for me. But, we're going to be mentioning the Beatles more than once today, Gary, so I'm going to get a jump on that and beat you to the punch.
Okay.
The Beatles, long before this movie came out, did an entire song about a box of chocolates. It was a George Harrison song called Savoy Truffle off the White Album. And the refrain in that song is, "You have to have them all pulled out after the Savoy Truffle." Now, to me, that's a much more realistic and insightful and cynical indication of the life and chocolate analogy.
Well, and while we're talking about this expression, it's actually the complete opposite, because most chocolate boxes have they tell you right on the box what that this is a coconut and this is a almond and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you do know what you're going to get.
You do know what you're going to get.
Unless you're dim-witted.
Ma Gump's aphorisms aren't, some of them are good, some of them are not so good. So, Jim, we decided to watch Forrest Gump because the main character interacts with a number of American presidents, occasionally changing history. This is also the 30th anniversary of the movie, which has led to yet another reassessment of this surprisingly controversial film. The reassessment will pick up next month when a movie called Here comes out. Here is also directed by Robert Zemeckis and also stars Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, and the same writer is involved with that too. So this will be a case of the gang getting back together again. I've seen the trailer for Here, and it looks terrible, which should prompt a series of reflections about why Forrest Gump was so much better. You have anything more to say about why we chose this movie?
Well, yeah, I do. But first of all, the trailer I saw, it was actually Forrest Gump 2. Is that the same as Here? I saw a trailer because I wanted to watch it after I noticed you mentioning it. It's called Forrest Gump 2. Just
Is it?
flat out, yeah.
Okay.
So and it stars Tom Hanks and Timothy Chalamet. And I didn't think the trailer looked very good. Maybe they changed the name, or maybe we're talking about two separate movies.
We might be talking about were there any dinosaurs in yours?
No.
Okay,
This was a trailer for Forrest Gump 2.
Okay. All right.
And
We'll keep an eye out for that too.
Yeah. But on the issue of why we're doing it, it's obvious our podcast is about celluloid presidents, and not only do several presidents appear and interact with Forrest Gump in this movie, but his experience with presidents actually helped make one of the film's key points, and which we'll come to later.
Okay. I wonder if we have the same point. I just want to add, too, before we get too deeply into it, that last month when I was in California, we took a Paramount studio tour, and one of the stops on the tour is the bench that Tom Hanks sat on when Forrest was waiting for the bus. So they moved.
Cool.
They moved they moved the bench to the lot, and it's probably the biggest single highlight of the tour. It's just this bench, and it just goes to show you the enduring legacy of the movie. That people would be going and sitting down on this bench and having
their picture taken. Yeah,
it could be. Cool. You could just say that it was it's just any old bench. All right, let me do a summary of the movie for those who haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a long time. Forrest Gump is a fable relating to America's social history between the 1950s and early 1980s. This movie is seen through the eyes of a low IQ character named Forrest Gump, who's played by Tom Hanks. Forrest is encouraged by his mother to consider himself the equal of anyone else, but he's actually more equal because he has three superpowers. First, he can run like the wind. Secondly, because his brain cannot think deep thoughts, he can focus on certain tasks in a way that most of us can't, which leads him to succeed in feats that require intense concentration. And third, he has an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time, thereby having an outsized impact on American history. So, for example, he teaches Elvis how to dance, becomes a star kick returner for Bear Bryant at the University of Alabama, goes to Vietnam and wins the Medal of Honor, becomes a champion ping pong player and helps open China through ping pong diplomacy, speaks to a massive anti war rally at the Lincoln Memorial, accidentally tips off the police to the Watergate burglary, inspires John Lennon to write the song Imagine, gets rich by building a shrimp business in Louisiana, and even richer through an early investment in Apple stock. And to honor his achievements, he's invited to the White House 3 times to interact with the holy trinity of celluloid presidents, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. Meanwhile, he falls in love with his childhood friend Jenny, who is a victim of child abuse and makes a lot of bad choices with men and drugs during the 60s. She pops in and out of his life, always leaving him heartbroken. During one encounter, she conceives his child and then leaves the next day. 4 years later, sick with an unnamed virus, she moves into Forrest's home, marries him, and then dies. The movie ends on a tear-jerking note as we see Forrest putting little Forrest on the same bus he used to take to the school 30 years later.
Considering all of the details that this movie is chocked full of, I think that's an excellent summary. You know, this sort of,
yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, it sort of reminds me of a Tom Wolfe novel
yeah.
in terms of the layers and layers of details that are piled on. But probably the most noteworthy device in the movie is this, and we see it all the time today, and is the way the fictional and the historical are woven together, not just in narrative, but actually technically. So you have an actor appearing in the same scene with a filmic image of a real life figure. And I don't know when this started. I don't know how it works technically. Do you know the genesis of this
Well,
technique?
the movie that this is mostly compared to is Zelig, the Woody Allen movie, in which a non-entity sort of appears throughout history in a number of newsreels. And this is in the 20s and 30s. So it's very similar to that. The technology they used for Zelig was a blue screen, so it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
any really fancy technology. The technology they used for Forrest Gump was CGI, very early CGI, where they actually were able to maneuver people's mouths to make it sound like they were saying what they were saying. So
Right.
sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. In the John Lennon scene, it's very obvious that the words coming out of his mouth are not the words that he's saying in the movie.
And I understand that the director, one of the director's first films, and the first film to use this was something I've not seen, but called I Want to Hold Your Hand from 1978. See, I
Right.
told you we'd be mentioning the Beatles more than once, and in which he has actors, interacting with the real Beatles
Yeah.
through those kind of tricks. I thought about whether this is an honest thing or not, but it's Hollywood and movie making. So why not? And at least you don't have to hire actors who don't really look like
Yeah.
the historical figures they're portraying and distract the audience. Instead, you use the real figures.
Well, in this movie, I think it works because it's a fantasy as it is. I mean, obviously, Forrest can't do everything that he's doing, so there's a big leap of faith. So everyone knows that Tom Hanks wasn't really at meeting JFK, for example. We saw the same technique used during Reagan, not
Yes.
quite the same though, because you never saw the character the Dennis Quaid character on the screen the same time you saw Mondale or Jimmy Carter or anything like that. So it was a different sort of blending, but
Yeah, the camera would bounce back and forth from
yeah,
one to the other. And the same in the Nixon movie by Oliver Stone. So, for example, you had during the famous 1960 debate between Nixon and Kennedy. You had Anthony Hopkins in black and white in a grainy kind of image, looking like it was off a 1960s television set. And then it would flash to the real John F. Kennedy making his debate comment. So it's been used quite a bit. I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, no, well, the CGI gets better. I mean, this was 30 years ago, CGI, and as it gets better and better, we will, we'll see a lot of. I mean, and now that AI it has really come to fore, it's going to be really hard to for filmmakers not to use it more often.
Well, I
Well,
think what actors are worried about is pretty soon you won't need the real actors either,
I will say this,
which is
in the movie that the trailer for here, you have Tom Hanks and what's her name? Um, the actress whose name is she's in
one
this
that's, yeah, so
what?
the co-star.
Yeah, the co-star.
I'm drawing a blank on it too. Robin Wright.
Robin Wright, right. Oh God. Maybe we'll keep this in, maybe we won't. I have to check it to see.
Hey,
But
listeners, we're old. Please excuse us.
anyway, you have them as real life characters, but they de-age them, right? So you see them when they're young. So they play both their younger selves and then their older selves. So anyway, let's talk about the presidents because this is a presidential podcast. Presidents don't play a big part in this movie, although every president from Kennedy to Reagan makes an appearance one way to another. What do you think the movie is telling us about presidents?
Well, a lot of it's used for comedic effect, and it's to make the point that Forrest is inadvertently affecting history. So I liked all the scenes where he was interacting with Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. We're jumping ahead, but they were some of my favorite scenes. The detail employed was very good. So after Forrest Gump told JFK that he had to go and pee, you know, Gump goes into the president's bathroom, and on the vanity is a picture from Marilyn Monroe, and the music from Camelot is playing in the background through all this. So they're very well done. I think it gets to one of the overarching themes of the movie is that you might meet a bunch of presidents, but that's not the most important thing in life.
Right.
That there are other verities, universal truths that are much more important. So in a way, I think meeting all these presidents is used as kind of a foil.
Yeah, I kind of had. Yeah,
it doesn't mean that much.
I had the same thought. I mean, the presidents in this movie, they're off to the side and not really affecting the action of the movie. The way the movie really uses them is time markers.
Right.
Because we know when they were president, we know generally what time the movie is set in. So when we see Jerry Ford get an assassination attempt, we know that this is 1974. But also the decisions they make are off screen. And the movie seems to imply that the presidents themselves are not as important as the big picture social movements that we see on the screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, there's something weird going on. I don't know exactly what they're trying to say, but related to the presidents is the matter of factness that Forrest uses to discuss assassination. The movie mentions without commentary the assassinations of JFK and RFK, as well as the attempted assassinations of George Wallace, Ford, and Reagan. And it's there, it's something that we have to deal with. And it's, the Reagan reference is assassination. The Jerry Ford reference is assassination. It's just,
I noticed it was almost like an obsession.
Yeah.
And even when it didn't drive the story, except for time marking, as you said, sometimes I think with the Ford one, they just showed some good old boys in the South watching it on TV.
Yeah. So he's not making commentary. He's just like, this happened. Well, so Forrest Gump was the second highest grossing movie of 1994, second only to The Lion King. It had domestic grosses of 330 million and international box office was 348 million for a total worldwide gross of 678. So in other words, this was a huge hit. It ranks 28th on the inflation-adjusted list of the most popular movies of all time.
But I would note, Gary, that in true Hollywood fashion, I understand that this film is a textbook case of creative bookmaking, where Paramount took a huge profit and poof, turned it into a loss.
Oh,
And Tom Hanks was smart enough to base his salary on a percent of the gross.
yeah,
But the screenwriter, for example, had based his on a percent of the net and ended up suing them. This was one of the, from what little I know, this was one of the most flagrant
right.
examples of
Yeah,
creative bookmaking,
yeah,
probably
yeah,
for tax reasons too.
yeah.
What did the
It had
critics
almost
think?
it had almost universally good reviews. It was a hit with the critics. It was nominated for 13 Academy Awards and won the Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, Best Visual Effects, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Film Editing. And almost immediately, there was a backlash against the movie. Critics and film snobs were unhappy that it beat out Pulp Fiction and The Shawshank Redemption for Best Picture. You know, Pulp Fiction is a lot edgier and made Forrest Gump look old-fashioned and sentimental. So for a long time, it wasn't cool to like this movie. You know, you'd be betraying a middle brow taste if you like it. Now I think there's a grudging respect for it. But part of the backlash was also due to the fact that some conservatives have tried to claim this as a conservative movie. Uh, the filmmakers have said they were not making a political but any film about the social upheaval of the 50s and 60s is bound to express a political outlook, whether it meant to or not. Jim, did you detect a political message in this movie?
Not a political message, but as such, but definitely a social message. And I think it raises some core philosophical issues and even existential questions, which we can get into when we discuss what the movie is trying to accomplish. No politically conservative movie would lampoon the military the way this one does. Much of the message is deviously and insidiously conveyed. You know, it almost reminds me a little of the song Imagine, since you already mentioned that.
Yeah.
Imagine is actually a radical song talking about there should be no countries and no religion and no property, but it's covered with enough sugar to fool people in a way. And I think this movie does some of that. It seems to suggest that politics and presidents and political movements don't matter that much, that business success is more about luck than skill or hard work. It questions the meritocracy and questions whether being smart or well educated really even matter. And so I don't think these are necessarily messages that you would associate with a conservative film. You didn't build that as not a conservative message.
Well, I've listened to a couple podcasts about this movie since we decided to watch it, just to see what other people were saying about it and see if there were any good ideas I could steal. And in both cases, the podcasters raised this issue of whether it was conservative or not, and couldn't even fathom why anyone would say it was. And I think that's because liberals don't really understand what conservatives think. And I actually do think that the movie makers inadvertently made a conservative movie because here's why. To the extent there are any villains in the movie, they're the leftists and the hippies. Meanwhile, the Vietnam vets are treated with dignity and compassion. Jenny's traumatized because the basic unit of the conservative worldview, the family, has failed her. Then she slips into the culture counterculture where she continues to be used and abused by the men in her life. Meanwhile, Forrest is a straight arrow who thrives in conservative institutions like the football team, the army, the business place. And on a deeper level, the movie acknowledges that humans are kind of born bad and need strong institutions to keep their selfish impulses in check. So even within a flawed society, the best that a good man can do is act with honor and dignity. You don't turn to the government or an ideology to fix things, but you do act with virtue. So I get,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I agree. I think in terms of what it's trying to accomplish, I think that through the example of Forrest Gump and the other lead characters, and on rare occasions through their words, I think it's trying to say that a lot of things we do in life, the credentials we crave, the famous people we meet, the achievements that we notch, the political movements and agendas that we become so obsessed with don't really matter that much, or at least they don't matter as much as love, loyalty, honesty, family, fatherhood, faith in God. So, in that sense, I think it's a socially conservative film, but certainly not politically conservative. And as I said, I think it attacks the idea of a meritocracy and that you didn't succeed because you were smart, but because you were lucky. It makes fun of the military, and it sort of debunks the whole idea of the great man in history, theory.
Well, those,
The bottom line is I'm surprised at its skill in raising existential questions.
yeah.
Do we have destiny? Are we in control of our destiny? Do we have free will or free choice? Or is it luck? Are we just floating around like on the breeze like that feather that brackets the movie? And I think, or is it some of both? And I think what's really impressive to me about this movie is it actually manages to ask that question
Yeah.
without, well, still being entertaining and digestible.
Yeah. Yeah. What I think it's trying to accomplish is, it just sort of stares hard at the human condition and accepts it. It definitely has a point of view about how you should act in a flawed world. And it's also bitterly ironic. Early in the movie, we learn that his mother named him Forrest after Nathan Bedford Forrest, the former Confederate general who founded the KKK. And Forrest's explanation is that his mother gave him the name as a reminder that we all do things that don't make sense. So it's a name to make him humble and not proud and not judgmental. And all throughout the movie, bad things happen to good people. And the movie just basically shrugs and says, yeah, that happened. You can act like Lieutenant Dan and fight against God for letting evil exist. But eventually, if you're going to be, if you're going to live, you have to embrace acceptance. Right.
Right, right.
So who would you recommend this movie to?
Well, almost everyone, because the meaning is so, and the references are so layered. So you could get 10% of this movie and still enjoy it, or you could understand 50 or 100% and still enjoy it. The only ones I maybe wouldn't recommend it to today are the political activists, those whose entire lives revolve around day-to-day politics. Because as I said, one key takeaway for me is that when all is said and done, politics and presidents, excuse my French, don't mean shit.
I would say, well, this is famously a movie that can be watched by the whole family, unlike this
Yes.
podcast. Thank you.
Okay,
It's,
merde.
yeah,
Pardon my
exactly.
French,
Now
merde.
I'm gonna have to put a warning on it. Is a particularly appropriate for baby boomers because it hopscotches through the highlights of their formative years and has an unparalleled soundtrack of classic movie rock songs. But boomers could watch it with their kids and grandkids. The only ones who shouldn't watch this movie are the cynics and people who don't like to cry, because there's a lot of crying
Yeah.
in this movie. All right, what did you like?
Well, I thought technically it was just very good filmmaking, and the writing and the actors, the characters, all the lead characters were well developed, and how the events were woven together, and as you said, put to great music. So it is a boomer's paradise for those, you know, of our milieu, or as one negative critic put it, a baby boomer's version of Disney's America.
Okay. Well, you're right. This is a movie that shouldn't work, but it does because it's so well made across the board. I mean, the acting, direction, writing, pacing is really good. It's never boring. So much happens in this movie, and the reason you can squeeze all that in is because it just moves right along. I mean, short scenes, they're able to tell these stories, anecdotes very concisely, and it's always clever in the way they keep tying Forrest to real events. So it's funny and it's heartfelt. So I think it's just really well made, and also the soundtrack is one of the great soundtracks. Apparently, it sold 12 million copies. So
Yes, yeah. Clever was a word I had written down too, Gary.
yeah,
There's social commentary, implicit or explicit, in almost every scene and
yeah,
almost every line. snippets and scenarios without banging people over the head with it. It could be ironic, sardonic, sarcastic, while covering much of that in the sugar, as I mentioned before.
Right.
I
And I
also
just
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I also like the way it challenged a lot of our nostrums and stereotypes. And many of those rang true to me. There's lots of role reversals in this film. Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass stuff. The gung ho warrior later becomes a long haired hippie. The peacenik is a woman beater. The class idiot becomes a business success. The self destructive Jenny fails at self destructing. When Forrest runs aimlessly and endlessly across the country with absolutely no purpose or meaning, thousands of followers find purpose and meaning in what he's doing. Hurricane, the bad news of a hurricane becomes good news for the Forrest shrimp business. The film is as complicated as life is.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree. All right. How about didn't like? Is there anything you didn't like?
Apparently, there was some debate during the filmmaking process about how much of a Southern accent Hank should lay on.
Hmm.
And he decided to go heavy on it.
Yeah.
And frankly, that got annoying to me. About the fifth time that he stretched out his monosyllabic name Gump into four syllables, I got real tired of it. And it also happens to feed on a long-standing unfair stereotype that Southerners are kind of gut dumb because of the way they
Right.
talk. All you have to do is turn on cable and network news these days to understand that stupid is as stupid does, no matter how refined the accent. So that's one thing that bugged me. How about
Um,
you?
I didn't mind the accent as much, but I thought that the movie didn't pay enough attention to the issue of civil rights. This is set in Alabama during the civil rights era, but there's only one scene that addresses it, and that's when Forrest comes across George Wallace standing in front of the University of Alabama door when the federal government forces the university to integrate. There's not a lot in the film to indicate that racism was a huge problem during those years. And because Forrest's best friend is a black soldier, the movie suggests that racism wasn't much of a problem either. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
I didn't notice that. That's a good point.
I don't want to overemphasize it either, but it just seemed if you were trying to show how it really was during those years, and I'm sure it would have been a downer to emphasize that too much, but it just is. It's not a really accurate reflection of the '60s, '50s, and '60s.
Now, you mentioned that you were never bored. And I have to say, I did think that after the very effective Vietnam battle scenes, I thought the movie did start to drag toward after the halfway point. And some editing could have helped. As one critic I read put it, the film is warm, wise, and wearisome as hell. And and it really is. It brought home to me that God, we've been around a long time. Made me
Yeah.
feel old because just having to go through all that. And then at the very end, before we really get into the 80s, but to have it strongly suggested that Jenny died of AIDS, and that's what was coming next if this movie had continued. Um, my God, sensory overload.
Well, I will say, first of all, let's talk about the AIDS thing now, because I was gonna talk about it during picking nits, but I don't want to defer it. That they were just wrong about that. I mean,
Why?
because she died in 1982, early
Yeah.
1982. I mean, the chances of her catching AIDS in 1981 and then dying from it so much sooner. I mean, it was just really starting to be nascent at that point, and I don't think it had broken into the general population yet. And even in real life, it barely, straight women almost never really got it. So
Yeah,
I
but there
think,
was a period when it wasn't named yet, and it was
yeah,
a mystery.
I know.
So I think the suggestiveness was there. I don't think it's impossible.
No, I don't think it's impossible, but talk about really extremely unlikely. If they had moved it to 1986 or something, that would have that would have been okay. That's definitely it. But 82 is really too early, I think.
Of
I
course, we
mean, yeah,
don't know what kind of
technically
we don't
possible, but very unlikely.
we don't know what kind of intravenous drugs she was really using either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It could have been happened off stage. I thought,
Anyway, I don't want to I don't want to dwell on that too much. I want to say the one other thing. I mean, I'll credit you with one thing where it did get a little wearisome, which is the running when he was running. I don't understand what the point when he was running back and forth across the country was supposed to show. I mean, he obviously was burning off his grief about Jenny leaving him again. But he becomes a cult leader. I don't know what that means. Where did he eat? Where did he sleep? Where did he go to the bathroom? And when he stopped right in Monument Valley, what happened to his followers and how did he get home? I mean, he just at least he
yeah.
run to the airport or something, but he just right there in the middle of the highway and like everyone's like, oh. So that was only about a 5 minute segment, but I didn't really get it.
I thought on occasion they carried the dim-witted conceit a little too far. So, for example, when he's in Vietnam, he's a trained soldier.
Yeah.
He's already been told that he'd make a great general, which is a social commentary itself on the military. And he says, his narration says, well, we took a lot of long walks looking for some guy named Charlie.
Yeah.
So sometime they made his comments too implausible. And
Yeah.
I understand that in the book on which the movie was based, which I haven't read, Gump is actually smarter and more cynical
Yeah.
than he is in the movie. And talk about wearisome, goes through even more professions in the book as an astronaut, a
Right.
pro wrestler, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I thought on occasions they carried that
Yeah, no,
too far
I
to
know what
make
you
it.
mean. I
Yeah.
mean, it's hard to tell where his intelligence. Sometimes he's smarter than he seems, and other times he's dumber than he seems. Let's talk about the actors. So Tom Hanks won his second Oscar for Forrest Gump in 2 years, for the year before he'd won for Philadelphia. This movie came out when he was at the apex of his career. He's been arguably the biggest movie star of the past 40 years, on par with Tom Cruise. What you think of the performance?
I thought it was excellent. Tom Hanks is a chameleon in a good way.
Mhm.
He's never typecast. He doesn't fall into typecasting. He can play almost anyone, it seems to me, and has. Um, I know some people compare him to that he's the Jimmy Stewart of this era, but with Jimmy Stewart, you'd always recognize his voice in the first 2 seconds. And Hanks has an ability to just be so malleable. So I think it was really good. It's also one of those performances that now that we know that he played this role,
Right.
uh, that we can't imagine anyone else playing it. But in fact, the first choice was John Travolta, and they also looked at Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, Matthew Broderick, and you read those names, and some of whom are very good actors, and say, "Oh no, what did you think of him?"
No, I think Tom Hanks himself is so affable that you forget what a great actor he is. And as I agree with you, it's impossible to imagine anyone else being in this role or doing it better. It's an impossible role because Forrest is not a realistic character, but Hanks makes you believe. Also want to note that Tom Hanks has never been a very sexy actor. I can't remember one movie in which he has a sex scene, but yet here he is, naked during his army physical and having two scenes, sex scenes, sort of, with Jenny. So
In
he's
his most in
saying,
his most Norman Rockwell kind of movie,
yeah,
which is funny.
exactly. It's
That's
like,
funny.
whoa, what's going on here? And how are we going to
So
explain that to the kids?
so much for Disney. Yeah, I think the other thing is he just goes down well. I mean, he's
Yeah,
a typical Hollywood lib, but even there, he doesn't beat people over the head with it or go crazy
yeah.
like other people we could mention.
Well, which we won't mention.
Right.
Robin Wright, she's had three iconic roles, all very different. She was the princess in The Princess Bride. She's Jenny Gump here. And then she was the Lady Macbeth like Claire Underwood in House of Cards. So what do you think about her?
I liked her. She proves that there is life after soaps. She got her start in Santa Barbara, the soap opera. A lot of Hollywood figures end up in soaps, but she started out and proved she could transition to major roles. So all power to her.
I think she's very good as well. I mean, she manages to be sympathetic, even though she keeps breaking Forrest's heart. I kind of understand why she leaves because Forrest is probably not the most engaging conversationalist. Um, but why do you think she left him the night after she has sex with him?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she was worried that life wouldn't be exciting enough
Yeah, I think
and
it's probably it.
stimulating enough.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I think she came there to be healed by him, and when he
Hmm.
proposed, she thought she was damaged goods and unworthy, and that she'd make him miserable. And the truth is, she probably would have made him miserable because she would have been so bored to tears after a few years. I think the sex itself was kind of a way of her idea of expressing love. Sometimes sex,
Hmm.
people that have been sexually abused feel that way.
Maybe it was like pity sex.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, or
gratitude
maybe
sex. I don't know.
maybe it wasn't good. Maybe the sex wasn't
Maybe that's
good.
why she left. Well, we saw the first time they tried that; it didn't work out so good either. So Gary Sinise,
Yes.
he's developed an affinity for Vietnam vets after playing Lieutenant Dan in this movie. He's in the Lieutenant Dan band that plays at military base. I thought he was very good. What did you think?
I thought it was the best acting in the movie. He was nominated for an Oscar, didn't
Mhm.
get it. He had the most scenery to chew, so he had
Yeah.
a little easier task than Hanks. He's a rare, outspoken conservative in Hollywood. So and is still gets good roles. Now a TV star, I guess. So I really liked him. I thought he was excellent.
Yeah, I thought he was very good in the movie. We saw something similar with Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise I thought was actually better as the long-haired handicapped veteran Ron Kovic in Born on the Fourth of July. But
Hmm.
Sinise is good too as someone who's angry because Forrest saved him during the war and denied him his destiny to die with his men in battle. I thought that was all be understandable, and he had to the extent that anyone has a character arc, he has the most. I mean, he starts off as a you know professional soldier, goes through this hippie period of, and then turns out to have be married to a lovely Vietnam woman at the Vietnamese woman.
Yeah, yeah.
Sally Field is someone that's been in our lives for our entire lives because we watched her grow up as Gidget
The
and
Flying Nun,
in The Flying Nun. Yeah, before we were while we were still watching junk TV, she was had these two, um,
Smokey and the Bandit.
Smokey and the Bandit. Yeah, she also played Tom Hanks's love interest in the movie Punchline, and then she played his mother in Forrest Gump. Um, I
I thought
you
she
know
was fine. I mean, she actually, I was actually reminded of the way she played Mary Todd Lincoln in
mhm.
Spielberg. A little bit crazy, but also astute on some things. Same kind of Southern accent. Um, it didn't really stand out to me, but I thought she was fine. Did an accomplished job.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that it would have been better if they'd given the role to someone else because, and this has nothing to do with her acting because she won two Oscars in the '80s and deserved them. But I just can't get over the fact that she was a bubbly teenager in Gidget, and her face continued to be so youthful that when they aged her up, she couldn't really pass for a 60 or 70-year-old woman. So I thought they
Mm,
would have been better going with someone who wasn't so a stereotypical young person. This is not an original question, but I want to ask if you think Mama Gump is really a good mother. As the podcaster Bill Simmons points out, she named him after the founder of the KKK. She has sex with a school principal, but doesn't first make sure that he's out of earshot. She fills his head with empty aphorisms. After he's a star kick returner at the University of Alabama, she lets him go to Vietnam and instead of convincing him to play pro football. I mean, she a good mom?
That's a good question. A good American mom?
Good American mom.
I
Not
don't
a good
know. I didn't
American
I didn't
mom.
even think about that. I thought I when I first saw this film, I had seen it many, many years ago.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hardly remember. But was her boarding house kind of a brothel?
Well, it's
Was
funny.
that supposed to be?
I did see someone speculate about that online, whether Forrest is imagining that it was just a that. Yeah, that was a little weird. How the boarding house,
It
how
was full
they,
of men. It was
yeah,
full of
well,
men that came and went,
yeah. I know. I don't know,
including Elvis Presley.
including Elvis Presley, who Forrest taught how to dance. All right,
Right.
let's
I'd
turn to.
also, well,
Oh,
I'd call out one other actor,
okay.
McKetty Williamson, who played Bubba. I thought considering the amount of screen time he had, which was
Yeah.
not as much as the others, I thought he really created a memorable character.
Hmm.
And and I think that's one of the strengths of this movie is that the characterizations, whether it's to the credit of the actors or the writing, were really good.
As long as we're talking about Bubba, have you ever been to the Bubba Gump shrimp houses? I mean, those restaurants.
No, I'm allergic to shrimp, so it wouldn't be a
Oh, that's
natural
right. I
choice.
remember that now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, me neither. I counted them up. I looked on Wikipedia and counted up. There's 39 Bubba Gump restaurants throughout the world, and there's one right in Times Square, and I've never been, and kind of want to go in and check it out, but
Well, you
probably
should by yourself,
by
not with me.
myself. Yes, I never get my wife to go into Bubba Gump house. All right, let's talk. Oh, and I just want to mention we should talk about Robert Zemeckis a little bit. He relies on this is the director of the movie who relies on special effects more than any other director. I mean, he's done. You mentioned what was it, Hard Day's Night. What is
I
that? What
want to hold your. I want to
I
hold
want to
your
hold your
hand.
hand. I want to hold your hand. Also, Back to the Future, Who Framed Robert Rabbit, Roger Rabbit, The Polar Express. Considering all the hits he's had, he's not considered one of the great directors. It might be his reliance on special effects that
Yeah,
really.
I hadn't really even heard of him.
But you've
And
heard of the movies, right?
yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm a very casual movie goer, so I was interested that other famous directors' names are emblazoned in our minds more than his. And yet he has a great track record.
Yeah, I mean, Back to the Future, also a huge, gigantic hit. Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Yeah.
Also a very important movie and mixing animation with real life characters. And The Polar Express is a big Christmas movie. So, well, let's turn to the history. And this is a work of fiction, so we really can't nitpick on the technical historical accuracy too much. But so let's focus on how it feels culturally. Did it feel like the 50s and 60s and 70s to you? And what was implausible?
Yeah, I thought it did. I mean, it just basically uh, did sensory overload. It selected a gazillion accurate historical details and events from those decades and put them to music. And so, in that sense, it was very realistic um, to those of us who lived through them. I I think there'll be a temptation on the part of we boomers to watch this movie, understand 90 to 100% of the references, and think, oh, we're so smart. No, we aren't. We just lived through it. That's all.
Yeah,
Big deal. And it reminds me of one critic who even saw Gump's dimness as a metaphor for baby boomers' glamorized nostalgia. Again, I think playing off this idea that just because you remember stuff doesn't mean you're smart. But I thought on basically, I thought it was very good on the details. Obviously, most of the scenarios that they plopped Gump into were fiction and didn't happen.
yeah. I felt that they were strongest on the 60s. It really did feel like they did a good job of recreating the 60s, which is such a tumultuous time. I thought it was not so great on the 70s when the values of the 60s went mainstream. And dads had long hair, sideburns, and leisure suits.
and terrible wide neckties.
Well, terrible wide neckties. I had some of those myself.
Me too.
But in general, I think the movie felt real. I want to do one nitpick. Apple, Apple company went public in 1980. So he wouldn't have, and this movie ends in 1982. So just like he didn't really have time for Jenny to have AIDS, there was not time enough for him to become a gazillionaire by the end of the movie.
Well,
And
also, Apple went up and down, almost
yeah,
went bankrupt at one point. So he might have lost all his wealth too before. And if he held on to it, he'd gain it back. But if he didn't, he'd be out of luck.
by the way, in case you're interested, a $1,000 investment in Apple stock in 1980 would be worth $1.3 million today.
Oh, that same thing happened with Home Depot,
Yeah.
where when they were getting their company going, they gave stock to some of the people that put stuff on the shelves. And if they held on to it, they became millionaires. And they were just, apron wearing box boys.
Um, let's see. Let's talk about our favorite scenes. The movie is full of favorite scenes. Sometimes when we're doing this movie, I struggle to identify more than one or two. The opposite problem here. So what problem? What were your favorite
Well,
scenes?
I think you're right. I found myself thinking more in terms of vignettes
Yeah.
rather than scenes or lines per se. But I did like the presidential scenes, as I mentioned. I
Mhm.
like the detail and the humor. I thought the John Lennon, Dick Cavett scene was funny because it was sort of lampooning the frothiness of John's imagined lyrics. I mentioned I really liked it. I thought the Vietnam battle scenes were actually suspenseful, were dramatic. And speaking of special effects, probably the best special effect in the whole movie was what they did with Gary Sinis's legs
Yeah.
and making him legless for much of his time on screen. And that was not the old trick of taping up his leg behind him. And, I mean, it was done with
Yeah.
early CGI.
Yeah.
That was really well done.
Yeah, the way he hopped around using his upper body strength to get in and out of chairs and stuff. Yeah, that I agree with that. I thought the whole Vietnam War sequence was great. I mean, I really, it wasn't very long, but it was suspenseful. It was just very powerful. And
Yeah,
I thought the music was used best during the Vietnam War scenes, only because they were using the same songs that had been used in so many other movies.
right.
You were, using the Doors songs. I think there was
Unfortunate Son.
yeah, and
Like,
Unfortunate Son. Yeah, all those songs which have been previously used in the movie in Vietnam movies were used here, and it immediately conjured up. I mean, it was like a um,
yeah,
salivating, like a Pavlov's dog there. I thought the scene at the anti-war protest at the Lincoln Memorial when Jenny calls out to Forrest and they wade into the reflecting pool to embrace. I thought that was just really, great. Also, when Forrest meets little Forrest and asks if he's smart, I mean, it really,
yeah,
makes your heart there.
yeah.
Uh,
I liked I like the feather scenes that bracketed the
mhm.
movie, and I know it can be considered trite, but you don't know, a first time viewer doesn't know when they see the feather floating down at the beginning of the movie,
Yeah,
how it will come back at the end of the movie as well. I also really like the final Jenny and Forrest Gump scene, and the scene at the grave site.
yeah,
I think that's when Tom Hanks really earned his Oscar
yeah,
because he was able to do more than just do almost kind of simpleton narration. He was actually able to do dramatic acting, dramatic emotional acting. And so I think without that scene, he might have had a run for his money in terms of winning the Oscar.
Yeah, I would say in general that from the moment he leaves the bench and stops narrating the movie and it moves into current time, when he walks into the apartment and little Forrest is there until the end, it's just like one long, cry fest. I was also very moved when Lieutenant Dan shows up at the wedding. And also the very end of the movie when little Forrest gets on the bus to go to school. I mean, all these scenes were, you know, were
Yeah.
favorite lines.
I've already mentioned a couple of them. The military guy telling the enlistee Forrest, "You're going to be a general someday, Gump," which as I said, is an example of sort of the way that commentary is done in this movie. And and I liked when Jenny wanted to become a folk singer, and when she was playing "Blowing in the Wind" on a stage in a strip joint, the naive Forrest Gump says her dream had come true. Again, just the irony of that.
Yeah.
I really liked, and when Forrest states what I consider the main theme, or one of the main themes: do we have destiny, or are we just floating around like a feather on a breeze?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think he concludes it was a little of both.
I'm gonna give you some of mine. When he's proposing to her, he says, "I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is." Uh,
Yeah, that was one of mine too.
Jenny says, "Why are you so good to me? You're my girl." And she says, "I'll always be your girl." And talking about Bubba, Bubba was my best good friend, and even I know that ain't something you can find just around the corner. Bubba was going to be a shrimping boat captain, but instead he died right there by the river in Vietnam. I mean, I guess that's not really profound, but
Yeah,
it was
which
very,
you just triggered in my mind another favorite little vignette. There's no line here, but if recalling how Bubba's mother had to serve a white woman in
yeah,
the fancy dining room, and then at the end of the movie, Bubba's mother was sitting in the fancy dining room being served by a white waitress.
right.
I thought
Right.
that the little turnaround there was clever.
Speaking of which, now this is one Mama Gump aphorism that I do like. Now, Mama said there's only so much fortune a man really needs, and the rest is just for showing off.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I guess that's a kind of a little obvious, but the way it's phrased. And now I thought the funniest line in the movie was, "I got shot in the buttocks. They said it was $1 million wound, but the army must have kept all that money because I ain't seen a nickel of that $1 million." $1 million wound, of course, was
Yeah,
Vietnam saying when you got injured, but not seriously, it means you got out of the war.
yeah.
Any more lines?
No, I think there's so
Okay.
many.
So, relevance or comparisons to politics and society today?
Well, I keep coming back to the fact that the movie seems to be suggested to me, that there's more to life than politics. And today we see so much obsession with seeing everything through a political lens, through a racial lens, through a group identity lens, to the point where we seek validation through government. We want our presidents to pat us on the head and say that we're good people. And I think people that live that way are missing out on some more universal truths. And I think this movie points that out.
Well, in a way, this is where not Forrest not being smart, classically smart, works to his advantage because he can't be sitting there thinking complex thoughts and he's just living in the moment. And we see that when he's riding the tractor back and forth. I mean, all he does
Mm-hmm.
is cutting the grass and I kind of agree with you. I slightly, I mean, I do agree with everything you just said. I have a slightly different take. that doesn't really have much in the way of political relevance except for baby boomers like us who want to relitigate the 60s, but it does have a philosophical relevance. I said the movie was a fable, but it's also a parable or a sermon on how to live life. Forrest's stoicism in the face of bad luck, his faithfulness and kindness are a good model for how we should live. And you know how there's the seven deadly sins, but according to Christian doctrine, there are seven heavenly virtues, and these virtues are humility, charity, chastity, gratitude, temperance, patience, and diligence. And Forrest practices all of them and is able to live a life of meaning as a consequence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think this movie could be made today?
Well, I'm not sure that what you just said would be prime fodder for a movie today because, for the same reason you said some of the backlash existed. Where is the edge? Where is the importance of social movements, that kind of, and political movements? And now everything is seen through the prism of politics and activism, and people look to government and political figures for validation and meaning. And I think they think it matters a hell of a lot more than this film thinks it matters. So I'm not saying the film says it doesn't matter. I'm just saying the film broadens out the focus to sort of more universal things. So I
Yeah,
don't
I
that
kind of agree with you. I don't think it could be made today. I mean, part of the reason is that when it was made in 1994, it was already a nostalgia looking back, and that came at a time when they were reassessing Vietnam in the 60s, and when all that reassessment was at its height. That war ended 50 years ago, and it's not an issue that is top of mind for anyone who's not old enough to collect Social Security. So I think this movie is really tied to that time period and our memories of that time. I
Mhm.
would really like to watch this with somebody who's in their 20s to see if they get it, if they like it, if they understand it, or maybe not having the nostalgia is not a problem. You might be able to they might be able to see it more clearly than we can.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see what Forrest Gump 2 tries to
Yeah, we'll say,
accomplish
yeah, I don't
or
know.
here. I mean, it's hard to imagine that, Tom Hanks doesn't have to do any project.
Right.
So it's hard to imagine he would get involved with something that had, like, for example, a terrible script.
Mhm.
But you never know. I mean, big stars have stumbled before.
Well, they were going to make a Forrest Gump script, a Forrest Gump movie, and apparently the script was kind of outlandish and didn't really work, and it got derailed by 9/11. And
Hmm.
at the time, they thought, well, this is not the period to have another feel good, look back at nostalgia. That was a bad time for that, and it never got made. So maybe they've updated it since then. I actually have not heard about there was a Forrest Gump 2 in the works.
Hmm.
If
Maybe
you
it was
were,
a fake thing I stumbled on,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but
fake
it
news.
was a professionally done trailer.
Okay.
Which I'd have to ask you, which presidential scene did you like the best?
I like the one with LBJ.
Yeah, me too. Just the idea of turning around and dropping your drawers.
Yeah, showing your ass to the president. Which is funny because that's kind of what Johnson's thing was. I mean, he was famous for pulling up his shirt and showing his appendix scar.
Holding
So
staff meetings while sitting on the toilet, that kind
yeah,
of stuff.
yeah. So I thought that was kind of funny. And of course, the Nixon scene where he says, "Where are you staying?" And he says, "Well, I don't have any place to stay." And Nixon says, "Well, I can recommend a place for you."
And
And
you
then
knew what was
and then
coming.
Watergate, yeah,
Yeah,
that was pretty funny.
they were all pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. If you were a high school teacher, would you assign this movie?
Oh, absolutely. I just think it's a great way to introduce some history, some classic music, and in a non-profane way. I think it'd be really good.
I would only do it for advanced senior class because it assumes you already know the narrative of that era. So This would be good for a class that wants to dig more deeply into the social history of those days. So I would show it. Yeah. All right. Time for a grade. What do you got?
Hey,
Same here. Okay, good. We finally agree on something.
for once.
Yeah. We're very
Now, if
solid.
only you could move your grade up on PT 109.
Oh God. It's funny. The two movies that we've disagreed the most on have been Kennedy movies. So,
Yeah,
but the reason I didn't like PT 109 is because it didn't portray him positively enough. Anyway, okay.
that's strange.
Okay. So, any last words before we close off here?
Now, life is not like a box of chocolates, and you have to have them all pulled out after the Savoy truffle.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I just want to emphasize again that the podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and most podcast platforms. You can subscribe there, and I hope that you will. If you have any comments, you can call me you can email me at garyholmes76@gmail.com. Jim, we'll see you soon. You and I need to hang around afterwards to make sure we're agreed on our next movie. So this will be a surprise for our viewers when it comes out, 3 or 4 weeks from now. So
Eventually, we're going to have to start writing and producing our own movies so we can keep the podcast going.
Right. All right. Bye-bye, Jim.
Take care.
Paramount Pictures presents Tom Hanks. I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is. Robin Wright. Will you marry me? I'd make a good husband to you.
You would, Forrest.
But you won't marry me. Gary Sinise. I never thanked you for saving my life. And Sally Field.
My boy Forrest is going to get the same opportunities as everyone else.
A film by Robert Zemeckis. What's Martha? Say, Mom?
You're going to have to figure that out for yourself.
The world will never seem the same once you've seen it through the eyes of Forrest Gump. My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.